According to reports from Indian media, on November 21st, a citizen from India's Arunachal Pradesh was detained at Shanghai airport for over 18 hours. Her passport was confiscated. Chinese customs officials declared her Indian passport invalid. Prema Wangjam Thongdok, an Indian citizen who has lived in the UK for about 14 years, said the incident occurred when she was in transit from London Gatwick Airport through Shanghai on her way to Japan. She described her painful experience. I had basically crossed E-gates, standing in the queue for my next flight, and then one of the officials from the Chinese immigration came over and singled me out of the queue. I asked her what was happening. She didn't say much, just asked me to follow her. And then she went on to say, "Arunachal, not India, China, China. Your visa is not acceptable. Your passport is invalid." Thongdok further detailed the inappropriate behavior of the airport officials, accusing them of mocking her. When I tried to question them, they said, "Arunachal is not part of India," and started mocking and laughing, saying things like, "You should apply for the Chinese passport. You're Chinese. You're not Indian." She mentioned that during a layover in Shanghai in October 2024, she faced no issues. However, this experience left her feeling humiliated, as airport and airline staff repeatedly mocked her passport. She told the media, "My passport was unjustly confiscated, and I was detained at the airport for 18 hours without food, help, or normal communication. When I asked for updates or to speak with officials, the staff yelled at me. The way they communicated among themselves was clearly threatening and humiliating." She said she had previously consulted the Chinese embassy in London regarding her layover, and they had assured her that no visa was required. Despite holding a valid Japanese visa and staying in the transit area, she was still refused boarding by Chinese authorities. Due to Wi-Fi issues, she couldn't seek help, and platforms like Google and WhatsApp were unavailable in China. Later, China Eastern Airlines and customs officials told her they wouldn't return her passport unless she booked a new flight through the airline. She was forced to miss her flight to Japan, which led to significant financial losses. The hotel, flight, and vacation plans were all cancelled. Through a friend in the UK, she reached the Indian consulate in Shanghai. Finally, Indian officials escorted her to the plane at 10:20 p.m. The dispute between China and India over Arunachal Pradesh has been long-standing. Beijing condemns any official Indian activities in the region, and officials or civilians related to Arunachal Pradesh cannot obtain formal visas to visit China. Thongdok said that in the end, she got her passport back, thankfully without a stamp. She added, "We are part of India. We speak pure Indian languages. We don't understand Chinese. We're all Indian. I want to raise this awareness that residents of the northeast of India should not face such harassment in terms of being called and being told that you're not part of the country that you're so proudly a citizen of. I would like the government of India to raise this on a diplomatic level with the Chinese authorities. This is not something a regular citizen can resolve. I would just like to request the government of India to take strict action against the Chinese authorities and government on such matters." According to sources from India's Ministry of External Affairs, India has already raised a firm diplomatic protest with China, in both Beijing and Delhi, on the day of the incident. The Indian consulate in Shanghai also intervened in the matter, offering assistance to the detained traveler. India emphasized that the reason for the detention was absurd. Arunachal Pradesh is undisputed Indian territory, and its residents have every right to hold Indian passports and travel with them. India has also pointed out that China's actions violated the regulations on civil aviation outlined in both the Chicago Convention and the Montreal Convention. Interestingly, just days before this incident, direct flights between China and India had been resumed. On October 3rd, one of India's largest low-cost airlines, Indigo, announced it would begin daily direct flights from Kolkata to Guangzhou starting October 26, with another route from New Delhi to a Chinese city also being planned. Since early 2020, direct flights between India and China had been suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They were further halted after the violent Galwan Valley border clash, which resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers, marking one of the most severe military confrontations in decades. Diplomatic relations between the two countries sharply deteriorated, and direct flights had not resumed since. It wasn't until the end of August this year that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited China for the first time in 7 years. There, he attended the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin. He met with CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping. Both leaders emphasized that India and China are development partners, not rivals. The announcement of resumed direct flights was seen as a continuation of high-level engagement between the two nations. During his visit, Modi reportedly reiterated his concern about India's growing trade deficit with China, which has reached nearly $99.2 billion. He also highlighted the importance of maintaining peace and stability at the border to avoid a repeat of the 2020 military standoff. Notably, in June of this year, Beijing allowed Indian pilgrims to visit Mount Kailash in Tibet for the first time since the 2020 border clash. International observers view the resumption of direct flights not just as a logistical arrangement, but as a symbolic and functional step. U.S. economist Davy J. Wong analyzed that the resumption of flights is a mix of symbolism and benefit. Symbolically, it represents a loosening of tensions and a willingness to restore people-to-people exchanges. Substantively, it will reduce the time and cost of business, tourism, and educational exchanges, providing direct economic benefits. However, he also cautioned that the resumption of flights could serve as a diplomatic bargaining chip, meaning that India retains strategic space between China and the U.S. in their ongoing geopolitical competition. International affairs expert Sun Guoxiang stated that the resumption of direct flights is primarily the result of winter season negotiations and air rights talks, marking the first step of both symbolism and function. He noted that over the past year, the border situation has relatively cooled, and both sides resumed talks on mechanisms, which provided policy space in less sensitive areas. This paved the way for the direct flights to take off. When questioned whether the resumption of flights signals India's shift closer to China, experts unanimously stated that the resumption does not equate a strategic alignment with China. Davy J. Wong believes this is more a part of India's diplomatic rebalancing. With the U.S. continuously pressuring India on energy and Russian trade issues, India chose to restore direct flights to maintain diplomatic flexibility. This isn't merely a pivot towards China, but more about maintaining autonomy. Sun Guoxiang pointed out that India's positioning toward China remains competition plus control. India maintains caution in security and high-tech sectors, while pragmatically repairing people-to-people exchanges and facilitating business to prevent competition from spilling over into overall relations. He described the resumption of flights as limited warming, cautious thawing, with a pace that is controllable and reversible, depending on border negotiations and public opinion risks. Analysts also noted that the relationship between the U.S. and India has cooled recently. India has continued importing Russian oil, which Trump sees as a violation of U.S. sanctions policies. This led to a doubling of tariffs on India to 50% in early August. The U.S. even urged other G7 countries to strengthen sanctions on nations purchasing Russian oil, specifically calling out India and China. As a result, U.S.-India relations have reached a low point. The U.S. has largely adopted a tacit approval and observation stance regarding the resumption of direct flights, considering it a low-sensitivity issue that won't affect U.S.-India cooperation in defense, Indo-Pacific security, or semiconductor links. What the U.S. truly cares about is supply chain security and emerging technologies. As long as the flights don't involve sensitive technology transfers or sanctions violations, the U.S. is unlikely to invest too much policy capital. Analyst Mr. Z believes that while the resumption of direct flights represents a compromise between symbolism and interest, it does not signify India giving up its autonomy. India, as a regional power courted by the U.S., China, and Russia, has indeed warmed its relations with China recently. This is mainly due to three factors. First, due to U.S. tariffs and immigration restrictions, India has faced certain pressures and needs to demonstrate its major power autonomy and dignity. Second, in the previous India-Pakistan conflict, India did not hold the upper hand, which pressured India to ease relations with China. Third, although India adheres to a non-alignment principle, Russia has always been India's largest substantive ally. Given that Russia and China are currently strategically bound, India must draw closer to China for comprehensive reasons. However, the relationship between India and China will never reach the level of strategic binding seen between Russia and China. This is because, geopolitically, India is China's greatest challenge in South Asia. India will never relinquish its dominance over the region and the Indian Ocean. In addition, a very important yet unfortunate factor for India in easing relations with China is that India's water resources are being held hostage by China. Media reports have previously stated that China is constructing the world's largest hydroelectric dam in the southeastern part of Tibet, on the Yarlung-Sampo River just before it enters India in the Ningxi region. This project, known as the Yaxi Hydroelectric Project, has a total investment of 1.2 trillion yuan, approximately 170 billion US dollars. It's expected to be operational by the mid-2030s. This has caused great concern in India, as they fear that during the dry season, cross-border river flows could decrease by as much as 85%, threatening the agricultural, industrial, and water security of millions of downstream residents. According to an unpublished analysis by the Indian government, the Yaxi Hydroelectric Project has the potential to regulate up to 40 billion cubic meters of water, roughly one-third of the annual water intake at the river's critical cross-border point, which could severely impact agricultural irrigation and domestic water supply. To mitigate the potential impact, India is accelerating the development of the Upper Siang Multi-Purpose Storage Dam, also known as the SUMP project. Located in Arunachal Pradesh, which the CCP refers to as South Tibet, the dam will store 14 billion cubic meters of water, making it India's largest water infrastructure. When completed, it will not only supply water for industrial and agricultural needs during the dry season, but it will also help reduce disaster risks in the event of Chinese flood releases. However, this project has faced strong opposition from local communities since it was proposed in the 2000s. This has prevented its progress. It wasn't until December last year, when China announced the construction of a massive dam on the Yarlung-Sampo River, that New Delhi's sense of crisis deepened. India fears that if a long-term competitor controls critical water resources, it could weaponize those resources. It's interesting to note that India wants to build a storage project to counter the threat posed by China, but this will take time. The most sensitive issue is that the location for the dam is in Arunachal Pradesh. Mr. Z pointed out that while the passport issue may seem like a territorial dispute, the passenger had flown to Shanghai with the same passport last year without any issues. Clearly, this is not a simple issue of territorial recognition. The Chinese government's decision to raise a dispute at this time appears to be a well-thought-out move. During the 1962 Sino-Indian War, after China's victory on the battlefield, China withdrew from the occupied areas, voluntarily ceding Arunachal Pradesh to India. Western journalist Neville Maxwell wrote in his book, India's China War, that when the Chinese military secured a significant victory, the Chinese government unexpectedly declared a complete and unconditional withdrawal. This decision, instead of alleviating global concerns, left the world in shock. Historically, there has never been a case where the victorious party voluntarily retreats without any obligations from the defeated side, essentially nullifying the hard-won success. Mr. Z explained that this was because China was extremely isolated in the international community at the time. It was not only at odds with the Western free world led by the United States, but had also fallen out with the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, India maintained good relations with both the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. Therefore, China could not afford a prolonged conflict with India and had to cede the territory for short-term stability. However, the Chinese government has long concealed the truth from its people. When domestic questioning grew louder, it then claimed that India forcibly occupies Arunachal Pradesh, and China had never recognized the fact. It used the territorial dispute it deliberately left unresolved as the perfect excuse to divert domestic conflict and create geopolitical tensions. This move by China mirrors its previous tactics towards Japan, where the core strategy is to say one thing and do another. It always uses the other party to shift the crisis when needed, while never honoring any promises. Mr. Z said that the latest passport incident likely has two major objectives on China's part. First, amid the recent diplomatic confrontation between Japan and China, China finds itself in an unprecedented passive position. Japan, which has long been bullied by China, has now suddenly become extremely assertive. The Chinese authorities are aware that the awakened public is waiting for a joke, while its patriotic nationalists are enraged. So they urgently needed a new outlet to deflect attention, and India was conveniently chosen as the backdrop for China's diplomatic toughness. Recently, much of the media coverage about India in China has been negative, with videos titled "A Large Number of Indians Flooding into China" and "Indians Urinating and Defecating in Public" circulating on platforms like Douyin. India seems to have become the next target after Japan. Second, the Russia-Ukraine war will not last much longer. Once the war stops, Russia, along with its close ally India, will quickly warm its relations with the US, and China will be left standing alone. To prevent or delay this scenario, and to stop India from joining the global campaign to contain China, China is likely using this incident to pressure India, sending a threat that China has the power and means to stir up trouble with India at any time. It may even weaponize water resources. India was the first non-socialist country to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. At the time, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru saw China as a potential reliable ally. However, after the China-India border war, Nehru's policies and personal reputation suffered a significant blow. India should clearly recognize that aligning with the US and other free world countries is the best guarantee for national strength and prosperity. India and Communist China can never have any true strategic trust. Any country that aligns with China will pay a price far greater than any short-term benefits.